We're writing an article about people with mental health disorders and how that people like are diagnosed that can cope with it. So I have a few questions. So my first question is, how can someone that's diagnosed with it be able to, communicate with other people in public spaces like school? How can it affect them when they're in public spaces?
How will their mental health disorder impact on their ability
when they're in
to
public
communicate?
Spaces around a lot of people.
Okay. I guess it depends what the disorder is.
Yeah.
So if it was generalised anxiety or social phobia, then they may find that
claustrophobic.
they may find that difficult. So the kind of public speaking or the sort of stage fright, anxiety. So some people can go red, they can shake, their voice can fail, they can want to run away because it's that fight or flight response. There are other. There's a whole range really. It's a really interesting question, but there's not a succinct answer because it depends on what their diagnosis is, and actually whether they've even received a diagnosis, because
if they're unaware of it.
Yeah, or they may be aware they've got difficulties, but a number of people kind of manage their symptoms, don't tell anyone because of stigma or not knowing who to tell, so they haven't received a diagnosis. Also, it can be a really long process to get a diagnosis. But it depends on what the diagnosis is, and also, you could have several people with the same diagnosis, and actually it would impact on them. It would affect them differently. So, if you've got somebody that's hearing voices, it may be very difficult for them to to concentrate on what's being said, or to be able to follow the conversation because they might be distracted. Somebody with attention deficit disorder might be distracted, might have problems regulating their emotional response to what's being said to them. If you're paranoid, being in an environment with loads of people. Thank you, you're very helpful. When I'm grappling for words. There's not a definitive answer. Are you wanting to? Your reason for asking the question, is it to have a sense of what might other people notice?
When I'm writing the thing, I can actually show how the people that are diagnosed feel, from their point of view. So the second question is, how can a person, what are some symptoms of mental disorder? So how can a person know if the opposite person may have a mental health? So then how can they help them whilst in a conversation?
Okay. Young Minds is a website, it's a national organisation, and also the Royal College of Psychiatrists have a website, and on there's really detailed, easy to access but really detailed descriptions of what symptoms are and what might be helpful. So again, it depends what the mental health difficulty is, but as a friend you might notice that somebody is more withdrawn, acting in a different way, more withdrawn, so isolating themselves, taking themselves out of a group, cancels, plans to go to the cinema, may stop eating, or push their food around the plate, or go to the toilet straight after they've eaten. They might be tearful. They might their schoolwork might start to go down. They might start to look like they're not taking care of themselves in quite the same way. So their uniform might be a mess, or they haven't washed their hair, or they're a bit smelly.
So if, let's say, it was a child and their parents didn't notice, how long could the child actually go without there being a actual certain point where the parents start really noticing the symptoms?
Sometimes parents don't notice. There's been a recent, I wish I knew the reference, but there's been a recent survey that showed that 4 out of 5 parents wouldn't seek help for their children if they thought they had a mental health issue.
Would they just think it was like a phase or something?
I think it's a phase. Think,
Puberty,
this is like a teenager. Often teenagers will go off to their bedrooms, so, parents work nowadays, and nowadays I'm so old. Parents are working, so you might only see your teenager for sort of 10 minutes of an evening. Families tend to eat separately as well, so you may not notice, you may not want to acknowledge it because of worrying about what that might mean for their future. You might be suffering with a mental health problem yourself. Makes it.
So it's part, because I read in an article when I was researching, it said that sometimes mental health disorders can be passed down by genes.
There's certainly what they call a genetic loading. So if a parent has got a mental health disorder, you're at a higher risk of having one. How much is genes and how much is what you're exposed to growing up from with a parent that's got a mental health issue, and whether that impacts on their capacity to parent is the question.
Would it be, if the parent also had a mental health disorder, wouldn't it be a bit easier for the child to understand because they've had to sort of adapt to the parent whilst they were growing up? So wouldn't it give them an advantage?
Really good question, and I think that the answer to that is yes, sometimes. If the parent has had a really good experience of managing their illness, and that they're transparent about it in the family, and the child has had a positive experience of mental illness, often that's not the case. Often it's not spoken about, or the child might not really know, or they've experienced the sort of more negative aspects of mental illness, and so it's a lot harder then to want to acknowledge it in yourself. Or if you don't like your parent and you suddenly think, gosh, I've got the same disorder, I'm a bit more like my parent than I'd like to be.
Because they feel distant, but then they've got the same genes.
So parents don't necessarily notice it. School doesn't necessarily notice it because you've got 30 odd children in a class and you've got a lesson to deliver. So they
can't be worrying about the child.
They might start to notice if schoolwork drops off. This school is very good at starting to pick up on signs, but I work in a lot of other schools where it doesn't get noticed. So
then they tell the parent, and then the parent starts thinking, oh yeah, I have the same thing, so maybe I should have talked about it before, so now they know.
They might think that. Sometimes parents can feel really guilty and responsible and not want to acknowledge it, or think, oh gosh, my child could have a dreadful life like I've had. And actually that's not the case. In the majority of mental health disorders, people can be treated and have really good lives and have healthy relationships and good jobs, and it not impact on them in the same way as a lot of mental health disorders aren't chronic, but in the same way as you'd manage something like diabetes.
So we know that some people with mental health disorders are often overlooked upon. So let's say there was a job to become to work in an office, and a person with a mental health disorder was wanted to sign up to do it, but the person that was giving the job thought, well, it's going to be a lot of stress and we don't think people with mental disabilities will be able to handle it. So why do you think that people often think that people with disabilities can't handle daily things sometimes?
Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma attached to mental illness or mental health disorders. And I think a lot of it is images in the press. The way people with mental illness are reported, the way they're portrayed on soaps.
In films,
they're either a psychopath that goes around murdering people or smothering babies, or they're the pathetic housewife that can't get out of bed and cries and smokes and drinks a lot.
Yeah. Depressed.
Yeah. So I think that's a problem. There are lots of myths around, because if it's there's legislation in place to protect people from having somebody make a judgment about whether they can do a job or not. If you're in a job and you have mental health difficulties, then employers should look at whether they can reorganise your job, perhaps look at whether it is really stressful and they could change your job in some way to help you to manage it. So the legislation does protect it. I think it's very difficult because a lot of the prejudices, a lot of the stigma isn't spoken about, because of course that's illegal. So people perhaps will be disadvantaged. I'm hopeful that that's changing.
Yeah.
There are a lot more public profiles. Yeah, and I think with gosh, I've forgotten her name. The princess that's Kate Middleton. Yeah. She's doing a lot with Place to Be. So I think as we get more sort of high profile ambassadors that just normalise mental health,
Then
and say actually
stereotypes.
and say it's just the same as a physical health problem. It's an organ that isn't producing the right amount of hormones.
So my last question is that if let's say an organisation, let's say charity creates an organisation where there were a lot of jobs for people that have mental disabilities and disorders of that type. There was a job and there was a community where people with mental disabilities were helped more and trained more so they could work in actual jobs and companies that would pay them as equal as everybody else. Would you think that would be a good idea, or would it be like not really worth it just to train them to work where they should already be welcomed?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I'd say, actually everybody should have equal access, and then there should be the same opportunity for somebody with a mental health disorder. My history is I used to work in an adult rehabilitation unit, so it was a home in the community. And we did a lot of that work, so helping people back into employment. And because for somebody with a disability, then there does have to be some adaptations sometimes in the workplace, and they do need perhaps additional help filling out application forms or getting to an interview, or if a mental illness also impacts on your self-esteem. One, because it's often a symptom of the illness, but then two, because of the stigma that's attached to it and the negative sort of connotations. So they may need help with that. So it's both and, really. I think there are projects around the country.
Pros and cons for each.
That there are projects that are supporting people with mental health issues and young people mental health issues into employment or into further and higher education. It's also kind of it's unfortunate that there's a need for that, but I guess there is for a very small percentage of the majority of people with mental health issue, and it's on average 1 in 4. In fact, with children and young people, it's 1 in 3. Three young people in every classroom in England will have a diagnosable mental health.
One that adds up, that is a lot of children. That may need.
But a very small percentage of them will have sort of chronic difficulties, and an even smaller percentage will have chronic difficulties that actually impact on their day-to-day life sufficiently that they would need extra help to get into employment.
So, thank you for answering all my questions.
No problem.
They were very good answers, and I hope that I can be able to get a good answer out of it.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Really good.